It's actually pronounced ProRes, not Puroresu. Here's 5 reasons. Finally, the Roger has come back to 5 reasons. And on this year's Wrestlemania special for 5 reasons, we're talking about 5 exclusive wrestling games for the Super Famicom, the Japanese Super Nintendo. And we'll also give you a kind of a crash course in the history of Japanese pro wrestling, I guess.
We've talked at length about the history of the Super NES on this show, but the nutshell version is that the Super Famicom, successor to the Famicom, or the Japanese NES, hit Japan on November 21st, 1990, and it was a massive success. The first wrestling game to appear on the system was the 3rd game in the storied Fire Pro franchise, and the first to appear on a system besides the Japanese TurboGrafx Super Fire Pro Wrestling, released on December 20th, 1991. After that, there were wrestling games aplenty. Now, Fire Pro isn't typically associated with legitimate promotion, usually opting to use quote-unquote fictional wrestlers, who just happen to have a great deal in common with real wrestlers, but real promotions did license other games, from top promotions like New Japan to smaller ones like Genichiro Tenryu's Wrestle and Romance, and some others we'll get to later.
Also, before we begin, I just want to get this out of the way. We're not going to be covering any New Japan games. Yeah, I know they're the biggest promotion in Japan and the 2nd biggest promotion in the world after WWE, but their Super Famicom output isn't really worth talking about, I'm afraid. So, yeah, sorry Bullet Club marks. And with that out of the way, here's 5 reasons to import a Super Famicom. Wrestling reasons, that is.
This is either the 4th or 5th Fire Pro game on the Super Famicom, depending on whether or not you count Super Fire Pro 3 Easy Type as a separate game to Super Fire Pro 3. Gameplay-wise, it follows the established Fire Pro gameplay style, which continues to this day, favoring timing-based grappling over button mashing. At any rate, this game is most noteworthy for its Champion Road mode, a story mode in which you take control of a trainee, known in Japanese wrestling as a young boy, and train to become the world champion. Over time, you form a tag team, fall in love, and more. So what, I hear you asking, what's the big deal about that? Well, this story was written by Goichi Suda, aka Suda51, in one of his first roles as a game designer, working under Fi-Pro creator, the late Masato Masuda. Suda51 immediately gained a reputation for the offbeat, as is illustrated by this game's ending, which, if you don't know what happens, I won't spoil it here, but it's definitely never happened in any other wrestling game that I can think of. The tragedy is that the game doesn't currently have any sort of English translation, so you'll have to follow the plot by the images, though I'm told a fan translation is currently in the works.
When it comes to pure gameplay, there are definitely better Fire Pro games on the Super Famicom. Games that look a lot better and control a little bit tighter, but you know, when it comes to pure narrative, there's nothing quite like this one. It's unique in all of wrestling gamedom. And if you want to check it out, it's actually pretty cheap. I wouldn't pay more than 10 bucks for a bare cart.
Let's get weird. Really weird. Like Gold Dust in 1998 weird. All Japan Pro Wrestling was founded in 1972 by Shohei Giant Baba, and has historically been a rival to New Japan. Right now, they're at what most consider to be a low point, but in the 90s they were firing on all cylinders, and publisher Messiah released 4 Super Famicom games based on the promotion. One was even released here in North America as Natsume Championship Wrestling, but that's not what we're talking about. No, we're talking about Fight da Pon, the wrestling board game. Now, I get it. You might be thinking this is some oddity I dug up that I won't actually recommend, like Wily and Light's Rock Board or whatever, but no, this game is actually fun, with matches that play out using cards found around the board, with you playing cards in real time to do moves on your opponent. And the artwork is great. I mean, Misawa never looked this cute in real life. Sadly, this is another one without any kind of fan translation or anything, but the gameplay is easy enough to understand and the story sequences are very expressive, so I recommend it.
This is one of those rare games where I can honestly say that I cannot think of any other games like it, and for me, that counts for a lot. I mean, no other games have chibi versions of Mitsuharu Misawa and Abdullah the Butcher running around, you know? And hey, surprising no one, this one is also super cheap. On eBay, as of this recording, there are complete copies for less than 20 bucks, so move on that.
When the Fire Pro series started to pick up steam in the 90s, a lot of other developers imitated their formula, from the aforementioned Messiah to Bulletproof Software. Yeah, the Tetris people made a wrestling game. And it's pretty good too, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Max Voltage. This is Konami's take on the Fight Pro clone, and as one might expect from this era of Konami, it's pretty good. The gameplay is Fire Pro's timing-based grapples through and through, but aesthetically, well, it has more in common with Donkey Kong Country, which I personally think has aged horribly, but you can't say they phoned it in. I mean, listen, you can even hear commentary. Yeah, live human-speaking commentary. I don't know of any other 16-bit cartridge grapplers with running commentary. Plus, one of the fake promotions in this game is entirely populated with Konami characters, including a Snatcher and both Contra guys, among others.
This one actually does have a partial translation. Doesn't translate everything, but really makes navigating the menus a lot easier than it otherwise would be. So yeah, load it up on your flash card, or if you want the genuine article, hey, it's yeah, don't act shocked, it's actually extremely cheap as well. 20 bucks for a complete copy.
Remember earlier when I talked about smaller promotions? Well, this game was officially licensed by Pancrase, but the only real wrestler it featured was the promotion's co-founder, Masakatsu Funaki. Now, Pancrase is a bit weird because if you know it today, you know it as a legitimate MMA governing body, very similar to UFC. But in the early days, it was advertised as shoot fighting that used traditional pro wrestling rules. And while many matches were definitely that, more than a couple were, in fact, worked matches just like any other performed pro wrestling match. Now that would be interesting enough, but this game gets even more interesting. So moving on, it was developed by one of our favorite developers, Technos, the house that Kunio built. In fact, this was the final game put out by the original Technos on a Nintendo platform. And Technos was behind a handful of excellent arcade wrestling games, including most notably WWF Superstars and WWF WrestleFest, but this was their only one that was made directly for a home console. And it's wonderful. In fact, it's one of the top non-Fire Pro grapplers of the 16-bit era, coming in perhaps only behind Saturday Night Slam Masters. I want to talk more about this game, and someday plan to dedicate an entire episode of Obscure Old Games to it, but the major points that I want to get to are that the game feels very arcadey, but not button mashy. When you're close to opponents, you hit a button to perform a grapple directly, and there is a bit of a reversal system, but it's different than button mashing and different than Fire Pro. And the career mode is really deep, with your created character learning new moves and gaining skill points after each match, win or lose. You can also get married in the career mode, have kids, and once they're 18, they can train and become wrestlers, allowing you to take over with them after your original character retires. It also contains crazy gimmick matches like street fights and a scaffold match where you have to break through the ring to eliminate your opponent by sending them plummeting back to the ground.
Much like Fight da Pon, this is the true definition of a hidden gem. It's just as cheap as every other game I've talked about today, and it's got a full fan translation, so you have no excuse. Do not sleep on Hybrid Wrestler.
And we end with another Fire Pro. But in a current wrestling climate, with women in the US finally being taken seriously by the world's biggest promotion in the last few years, I had to talk about this one. The second of 2 Fire Pro games on the Super Famicom with an all-female roster, this is a rare instance of a Fire Pro game having a license. This one was made in conjunction with All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling, the world's longest running all-female promotion in history, having run from 1968 to 2005. It features numerous major stars including Asia Kong, Manami Toyota, and Jaguar Yokota. Legends Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto are boss characters, and ladies who had left for other promotions like Gaia get the standard Fire Pro treatment of, it's them, but not really. And these include competitors like Dynamite Kansai and Lioness Asuka. This was among the last Fire Pro games to hit the Super Famicom, coming right before Super Fire Pro Wrestling X, which was followed by a revision, X Premium. And it shows. The graphics are considerably better than Special, which came the year before. The animations are smoother, and that carries over to the gameplay, making it feel smoother. It does lack the in-depth story mode of Super Fire Pro Wrestling Special, but it has an English fan translation, which also adds the correct names for the non-licensed women.
So hey, if you dig women's wrestling, you absolutely owe it to yourself to check this one out. It's a must-own. And yeah, it's the most expensive game I've talked about today, but not by a large margin. Expect to pay 15 to 25 bucks for a bear cart. Man, I love that old wrestling games are so cheap. And that does it for me. Thanks so much for watching, but I've just been the Popcorn Match. If you come back before WrestleMania, expect to see the main event. Joey Pink with a Fire Pro focused episode of same name, different game. Make sure to check it out. You won't want to miss it if you smell what the Roger is cooking.
王道を行く全日本プロレスがついにスーパーファミコンに強豪16選手が繰り広げるスーパーバトル超リアルプロレスゲーム全日本プロレス新発売メサイアプランチャー2プラトンバトルロイヤルスーパーファミコン全日本プロレスダッシュ世界最強タッグ登場メサイア